Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film Rush, the Formula One racing rivalry between James Hunt and Niki Lauda. Rivalry that inspired them both to do better and play off of each other and try to each get the world championship from one another. This film is directed by Ron Howard, and Ron Howard works in very broad strokes. He makes big Hollywood movies. And in kind of the post-Spielberg era, him and Robert Zemeckis kind of do these very on-the-nose, big mainstream movies. At their best, play to the audience and are easy to understand, and it speaks a lot to the universal quality of film. And then in the other sense, it doesn't play very well, and it just looks like movies for stupid people. Rush plays into that quite well, and it plays into Ron Howard's instincts as a director and what he's good at. He seems to move this film along very quickly, not really wanting to dwell on anything too long to show kind of the weakness of him as a director. And he's smart about it, really, because I think this is one of his best directed films I've seen in a long time. I like this a lot more than Frost Nixon or The Da Vinci Code. I haven't seen Ron Howard do Ron Howard this well in a long time. This film is moving constantly. It doesn't really want to take a breath. It doesn't want to have a moment where the character is thinking and dwelling in his thoughts. It has quick moments, but it doesn't want to dwell on them. It wants to keep moving and keep moving. It's trying to be a big studio biopic, but it understands what would get the audience bored. So it's always like exciting. It's always fun to watch. There's always things going on. This happens and then this happens in quick succession. It's almost like Ron Howard trying to be an economical filmmaker. He doesn't really commit to it fully, and he actually does it kind of quite well. I was surprised how well directed this was from him. It's like he understood his strengths as a director. Like almost a normal director would direct an actor and play off their strengths. It's like Ron Howard was playing off his own strengths. Really, in the direction, there's nothing separating this from like a superhero movie, a big Hollywood blockbuster, in its attempt and in its broad strokes. Certainly I think it thinks it is because it's based on a true story or whatever. Direction-wise, it's not that much different, which makes it very appealing to audiences. The on-the-noseness of it, especially when like James Hunt, played by Chris Hemsworth, is looking for a new racing team, and when they say no to him and he's playing with like one of those racetrack remote control car things, and right when they say no, the car crashes, is a little too much. And they even like kind of basically have a moment where they talk about their motivations and what made Niki Lauda and James Hunt's rivalry so great. I mean, they pretty much spell out a lot of things that you really shouldn't be spelling out. You should be doing it with subtlety and performance, but it's almost like Ron Howard isn't even attempting to do that at this point, which, you know, I can't really fault him for not attempting to do something at all. He seems to understand that it's not going to work out for him, so he's just going to keep it in this style. And in that style, it actually works very well. I mean, you could really roll your eyes at a lot of the stuff that goes on in this film, and a lot of the way it's written and edited and the flow of it. But when you look at the film as a whole, I think he made a very entertaining kind of classical Hollywood biopic, and in the way that I haven't seen a biopic be this kind of entertaining. Most of them are dwell in fact. We have to have this detail in there, so we're going to mess with the flow and so forth. And even though he does do that, because Olivia Wilde's character doesn't really have any reason to be in the movie, certainly that happened. He was married to this model and so forth, but she really could have been a much more minor character. She was played up a little too much, whereas Niki Lauda's wife actually has a lot to do with the story. You couldn't really have the story without her. But Olivia Wilde's character, Susie Miller, she just is in there because it was a big deal at the time. It was very infamous. Everyone knew about it. If they had cut her out, would this film be hurt? I don't think by very much. And, you know, although her English accent wasn't horrible, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't Natalie Portman bad, there seemed to be a lot of details where I was like, well, does that really need to be in there? Do I really need to know that? Ron Howard seemed to not dwell on that so much. You know, I think Spielberg would be the extreme of that, putting in facts because that's what happened and these people will be educated about what was going on and such. This is somewhat more about the story than that, but he still kind of indulges in the little factoids of this true story and making sure you know everything. I still don't like that attempt at doing a biopic, but since he doesn't like fall into it fully, if you see a movie like Rush, you expect a lot of car racing. In that regard, this film kind of dwells too much on their rivalry, but doesn't show enough racing. And the racing that is shown, it doesn't feel like Ron Howard has much of a love for racing cars. It doesn't really show us until the end a full race, and even that isn't, the cinematography isn't amazing. It feels like the bare essentials to make it a little exciting, but that's mostly because of the drama that's been building up throughout the film. I mean, I just think, you know, if you're gonna make a film about Formula One racing, you want the racing to be incredibly exciting, and that's like a major important part of it. For a while, they're just not showing you the car racing very well. You'll just see little bits of it, and then they'll move on to something else, and that's doing a lot with the film's speed. The film moves very quickly and flows very well, and I understand they don't want to, you know, have it stop and do, you know, a racing scene and then go back and have this flow and then stop and go back and such. And that's understandable, and I think it works well for the flow, but I would have liked a little more car racing in a movie like this, and a lot better cinematography of the car racing. The car racing was probably like the worst shot element of the whole movie, and they kind of got away with having at least the end part be very suspenseful, but I think that owed a lot more to the drama and the rivalry of knowing these characters throughout it. And that was smart, because he made an action sequence that really wasn't that remarkable a lot more interesting based on, you know, character. So I applaud him for that, but I wish the actual, you know, technical side of it had meant a little more and had been a little more impressive. The complaints of this movie are minor. I think this film works a lot better at kind of this whole thing that these baby boomer directors have been going through, where they, you know, do interviews and they talk about like, oh, fucking superhero movies, there's so many of them, you can't make these movies about people and such. And realistically, they did, you know, they made big Hollywood movies, and theory-wise, they're very similar to the big blockbusters that they're somehow rejecting, even though they started that process, but whatever. But now that they're rejecting it and they're making films like this, like, you know, you could say Flight and Lincoln would be under the same thing. This is probably the most entertaining one I've seen so far. Ron Howard did an excellent job at directing it, because he makes it flow very well. Now, it's not a perfect movie. This is one of the better mainstream Hollywood biopics I've seen in a while, just because it flows very well. It is a little disposable in what it's trying to do, but it doesn't like overdo it. Maybe, I mean, the weeping cello they had going through it was a bit much, but I think ultimately this is a fun mainstream biopic, and it's very easy to get into and easy to understand, and there's nothing really that wrong about that when that's done well. So if you have seen Rush and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to.